Welcome to video 2 of 3 for week 10 in fall 2023 for the course Foundations in Cultural Anthropology. In this video, we're going to talk a bit about the instructions, the timeline, and rubric for the assignment, which is the final assignment for the project, for the course. And I'm trying to draw attention to some of these things to give you a few things to think about, but also to do some planning. And so what I'll do is I'll go to the course page in the syllabus that showcases the instructions. I'll go through those, talk about the timeline briefly, and show you the rubric once again. And then the separate video 3 of 3 for week 10, I'm going to go through some of the results of the survey that you guys did, and then just give you a few additional resources. So let's go to the syllabus right here. Okay, so basically in the syllabus, there's this assignment, which is 1/3 of your grade. And what I want to do is just to make sure that everyone's clear about the timeline. So number one is Friday, the 10th of November, you have a draft proposal. And in the third video, I'm going to have a couple examples just to give you a few things to wrap your head around in terms of the contents for this proposal. And then you're going to also, by the 17th of November, which is when we break for Thanksgiving, you're going to have to complete 2 audio recorded interviews. So today's the 24th, I believe. It's a Tuesday of October, and I would encourage you no later than this Friday to get your interviews scheduled. And if you're still unclear, we should talk as soon as possible. I can help you brainstorm. And then, of course, as I said earlier, I do have my own projects, and I'm happy to allow you to piggyback on them, and I'd help you frame the questions and then make it meaningful for you. And then you'd be, like I said earlier, jumping on a moving train. Like, these are projects of mine that are ongoing. And one is about psilocybin for wellness purposes. And then the other one deals with like an arts-based approach to community healing and water justice. The third item here is you have by the 8th of December. So you got a lot of time, but everything is planning and, making sure you kind of follow the instructions properly. You have an oral and videotape presentation that you'll do in Canvas by the 8th of December. And then by the 13th of December, you'll have to provide feedback on at least 2 peers in the course, which is part of the assignment. So, excuse me, once again, go through the instructions. It's pretty clear, very detailed. You have a few different formats to choose from, which I'll talk about later. And also you have the different elements. And again, in video number 3, I'm going to go through 2 completed draft project descriptions that will be helpful for your what's due on the 10th of November. And if you haven't picked a topic, ideally it should come from your heart, something you're excited about, and then we can tag on to that connections to the course, which I can help you with once I know what your topic is. So this is the rubric. I'm going to just look at this top section here. The rubric is, breaking down into 6 or 7 different points, a few things for you to consider to get like a perfect score. Show active engagement with the material, choose a format that works with the theme and the topic, and demonstrate substantial effort and thought. Create a project description of your planned project with key components provided by the instructor that is approved by the instructor before the due date, especially in terms of the format. You conduct 2 interviews, and there's different approaches to interviewing we'll talk about. And then also you're going to present a high production value in the Canvas discussion, like your presentation of your findings, or just in general, a presentation that synthesizes what you did. You'll provide thoughtful, substantive, and compelling feedback on projects of 2 of your peers by the due date. And so just, again, some of the points are wonky, but overall this is a 30-point assignment, and it's broken down into these 4 items: 10 points for the draft proposal, 10 points for the 2 interviews, 5 points for your presentation, and then 5 points for giving feedback. So let me end here, go back to the PowerPoint presentation, and continue on to the next slide. So, excuse me, on this slide, what I did is I just threw up a bunch of terms from the course, and there's others, but, begin to, if you haven't already, think about how you want to associate course concepts, notions, theories, anthropologists to your topic. So this is just a laundry list. I encourage you to go through the Canvas pages, the different modules, go through the readings. There's a lot of material, really cool material. And definitely I can work with you to anchor the material into your topic itself and build bridges that are pretty clear. So the next two slides just kind of help contextualize what you're doing in terms of interviews. So interviews take place in a larger process of doing research, like research design and methodological innovations. And so this kind of visual illustration kind of walks people through the research process. So you come up typically with a question, you select relevant sites or participants, you collect the data, you interpret the data, you have conceptual and theoretical work you do, you can go into writing findings, or you revisit your questions, tighten them up, collect more data, interpret the data, develop the concepts and theoretical stuff further, and then write up your findings. So again, just to demonstrate where, like, for example, the the interviews fit in. And on this page, it would fit in where it says collect relevant data, which is the interviews, the material that people share with you. Then here's another kind of scheme. Again, it just visually illustrates the research process, and it's very circular. And this is in general qualitative research. Ethnography is folded into qualitative research approaches. So you design the study, you develop a framework, you interview. Typically, you have a question guide that can influence and inform your conversations. You analyze the material, you try to verify it by, in other words, not just looking at the interview material itself as something solely to rely on, but you get other sources like newspaper or peer-reviewed publications to help contextualize and kind of verify and validate what was said in the interviews as best you can. And then write up the findings, share them, report back, and then you put them into themes. And it's just a circular process. It's like ongoing. Researchers are continuously looking at these stages and engaging in them separately, but also doing many of the stages simultaneously. Okay, so now a bunch of slides about the interview process themselves and what they mean and how you can maybe think more deeply and hopefully come up with something really cool for your presentations, your videos, and whatever else you're doing. So here's a couple bullet points. Ethnographic interviewing. It helps gather rich, detailed data directly from participants in the social worlds under study. Now, in a dream world, you go out and talk to people, where in their like cultural lives. But I understand many of you are going to be doing this probably on Zoom, or you're going to do it in person, like in a household or whatever, totally fine. But in general, this helps you kind of see people like in their environment. Bullet point 2, qualitative research technique, which is what ethnographic interviewing is. And there's different formats. There's 3 that in general are talked about. I'll talk about the last one. There's structured, which is like, let's say you have 10 questions and you don't veer away from those 10 questions. Like you ask every participant the same questions and you go through them without veering off course. Then you have semi-structured, which is a little more loose flowing. You have a few questions and they guide what you're doing. And then you have like informal, or what's called unstructured, and also known as open-ended, which is really just a conversation. You kind of improvise, you have a general area that you're trying to get at, but it's really just more of a conversation. And that's very different. It's a different experience for the participant and the interviewer compared to like a structured interview. So it all depends on like your philosophy of how to approach this. Some people like are really type A, they need to have it very structured. Others like the loose flowing, unstructured, informal, conversational approach. So it just depends on what suits you, but you need to explain what you're doing and why it works for you. Then lastly, respondents are empowered to shape, according to their worldviews, the questions being asked and possibly the focus of the project. So in other words, participants have agency and then they can influence the work depending on how they respond. On the next slide here, the context of the interview itself. So the interview situation constitutes a site of meaning construction that emerges out of the immediate interaction and also out of the ongoing relationship between the interviewer and the interviewee. So don't just look, at least for the purpose of this project, that you just have this like simple relationship just to collect data. Try to think of it as like this ongoing, even though it might be temporary, relationship, because it makes it more meaningful. And what that means later, I'll talk about how to follow up and thank them, and also let them know here's my final product or the draft, and you love their input. So try to think it along those lines if you're driven by this notion of demystifying and also decolonizing the anthropological process. There's significant time invested in developing, through repeated contacts and multiple interviews over time, a genuine relationship involving mutual respect among participants and mutual interest in the project, out of which meaning evolves. And then thirdly, the author emphasizes the need for awareness of the ways in which the relationship between the interviewer and the interviewee affects the research topics, and questions are approached, negotiated, and responded to. So if anything, look at these 3 bullet points and then try to imagine yourself as you go into the interview process of taking notes about different things that may be triggered by these bullet points. So the content of the interview is the main data, but there's also all this preparatory stuff and some of your thinking critically about the context of the interview, as bullet point says, as constructing meaning. It can make it that much more interesting than you just simply reporting on what you find. So think of these things critically, and they may come in handy as you go into your project. So the goals of ethnographic interviews. So listen well and respectfully, something called deep listening, developing an ethical engagement with the participant in all stages of the project, acquire self-awareness of our role in the construction of meaning during the interview process, be cognizant of ways in which both the ongoing relationship and the broader social context affect participants, the interview process, and project outcomes. Recognize that dialogue is discovery and only partial knowledge will ever be attained. Pretty significant. You're just, again, 2 interviews, you're just barely touching the surface and only speaking with them for whatever 20-30 minutes, and so recognize that this is partial. And this is why I'm really encouraging people to think critically about the format they choose, and then consider the bulk of your presentation to be more reflective along personal lines, because you know yourself better, and it'd be more interesting to learn from yourself about what worked well, not so well, your role as an anthropologist, as opposed to like you just simply telling a story about other people. So it's understood that you're not necessarily going to give us a full report of these other people, but really for this assignment, we're going to learn more about you and how you dealt with things that came up during this whole process. Semi-structured interview. Okay. So I don't spend too much time on the informal conversational approach, because we all know how to do that. Hopefully you take notes if you do that approach, but the semi-structured interview, there's 2 bullet points to consider. These consist of predetermined questions related to domains of interest, and identify factors, variables, and items or attributes of variables for analysis or use in a survey. So in other words, sometimes people do semi-structured interviews to then help create a survey. You're not doing that, but in general, that's what the utility of this approach is. It's a flexible format allowing students and researchers to explore topics in depth and cover new topics as they arise. So one of the tools when you do ethnographic interviews are these case studies, or what's called an ethnographic case, but also what's called a vignette. And these are just essentially like snapshots to help bring to life some of the material you collected. So 2 bullet points here. These cases or vignettes are personalized accounts of fleeting moments of fieldwork in dramatic form. That's by an anthropologist, Van Manen. It's basically a descriptive scene setting, and they're brief cultural portraits, a snapshot, a scenario, drawn from observations, field notes, interview findings, and preliminary interpretation as in analyses. So here's an example of a vignette. On the top left, it just kind of lays out the context, and then the vignette actually starts at the bottom. Essentially, what you're doing is you're telling a story. So a vignette is just like an anecdote or a story, and you pull together things from the interview and all the other things that you've done to prepare, and you basically tell a story. And ideally, you provide rich details, which is what anthropology, if you're into Clifford Geertz, uh, deep ethnography, rich details. All these things are super important to effectively portray other cultures, or simply what Geertz calls thick description. Okay, so vignettes, a little bit more. They comprise stimuli that selectively portray elements of reality to which research participants are invited to respond. They can The context vignettes portray is selective. So you basically are selecting the kind of context where you want to present and um, speak about these vignettes and the details that come up in the interviews. So these vignette scenarios require selective attention and necessarily omit the wide spectrum of issues that people face and respond to in their everyday lives. Quite simply, what this means, when you do an interview, ideally, and this will come up in the next video that I have for this week, ideally, what you're getting people to do is share a story. And then you're going to have over time a collection of stories, and then you're going to select the best stories to then share with us. But then you're going to integrate yourself in the story because we're more interested in this kind of process to learn about you and your ability to do interviews and then handle and apply some of the material from the course. So basically, as you're listening, you're framing questions to get people to tell you stories, not just to be a monkey and say yes or no to different questions, because that yes or no replies don't help. So the way you frame the questions is really critical, especially in a way that's really clear and that can open up a really wide range of space for people to talk about themselves or issues that are part of the interview. Now, the limitations, obviously, these are oversimplifications of presentations of the real world, and they produce unrealistic results. But what they help us do is report back on some of the compelling parts of an interview and what stands out when you look at the interview process and having a conversation with someone. Couple considerations. So all this stuff is really important in terms of you taking down details of what goes on in the process and also in your write-up and how you present things back. Was the interview in person or Zoom? Where was the location? Describe the location. What was the length of the interview in minutes? How much preparation did you do and what exactly did you do? What about debriefing? When you were done, like, can you say, hey, I'm done. What do you think about that? What do you think of the questions? Like, you can have that conversation in a debrief format with the interviewee. And what about the technology? Did you use a computer, laptop? What kind? Phone? Again, what kind? I do have digital recorders, or the department does. So if you need a digital recorder, like for an in-person interview, I'm happy to let you borrow those, or you can also use your phone. If you are using the phone or any device and you don't have a microphone, like to put on people's sweater or shirt, what I encourage you to do to get good quality audio, which is called source material for an interview, is put the device at least 12 inches from their mouth, because you want to be able to get a good quality audio file. And then, as you know, if you record on Zoom, when you quit the program, it'll give you an audio file. So you relabel it, and then that audio file you're going to actually submit with your final submission for this project. So note taking, do that during prior to the interview in terms of like everything that's going through your mind, what you expect from the interview. Do it after the interview, and the notes themselves could be logistical information. Are you nervous? Do you have any particular concerns? It could be descriptive details. It could be preliminary analysis, and it could also be reflection. So these notes are really important. So for each interview, you should have maybe 1 or 2 pages of notes, which are basically just diary entries. That material is something you can draw upon later in the write-up. As I said earlier, properly label the audio files, and you'll upload that into the Canvas page for the assignment. And then one way to simplify the process of an interview is you're basically looking for about 3 compelling quotes that directly relate to the purpose of your project, like your research question. So, 3 is like random. That's, I work in threes. So if you find 2 or 1 that's really compelling, that's fine too. But just think through as you process the data, what quotes work best for you or have meaning, and then you tell us why they're meaningful, like what they literally say, and then what's like the subtext of what was said. Okay, so now this idea of you got the quotes from the interview and then you integrate them into the project. So the quotes you select should connect to your project purpose and help bring to life theories, concepts, issues, and or ideas related to your topic. You can also integrate quotes into the vignettes if you choose to produce a vignette. A quote can be placed at the beginning of your presentation to illuminate a representative statement that embodies a key piece of your project. The same goes for a closing slide to say, hey, I'd like to end with the voice of my interviewee. So, in other words, you can start your presentation and say, hey, I interviewed Marty, and what I'm going to do is start with a big quote that he shared with me because it means so much and it's a great embodiment overall of what I'm doing in the project. And then potentially, as you go through your presentation, give us a couple key quotes that then link to the material in the course or your own personal reflection. At the bottom, the quote, it could be text or it could be the actual audio. It can be featured and discussed in your project as well as in your write-up. So just kind of being redundant with that last line to make the point really clear. Okay, here basically, I think this is like the second version. The key thing is, again, you are requesting someone to be an interviewee, and here's some text that can be part of an email and explain what you're doing. I did put in bold the third sentence from the end. I can provide you with my initial analyses of the interview and the final project submitted for the assignment. Okay, in December, you have your project to submit in a oral and video presentation format. Now, when we talk about decolonizing anthropology, that basically means trying to ensure that what we're doing is transparent and we're appropriately representing people. So, can you plan ahead and say, "Hey, Marty, I interviewed you for this project. I want to show you my presentation to make sure you're cool with it and to get any feedback." And this shouldn't be rushed. You should give people enough time to watch it. And you should be willing to get feedback if you are not effectively representing people and they feel you twisted things. And so this is really like a exercise in leveling the playing field and altering the power relations. So I'm encouraging you to do this. It's not a requirement, but it definitely shows that you're taking an extra effort to be transparent and again work with the participant who you interviewed to get their input on how they're represented in your project. And even if the whole project is about you, it's totally fine. I still think it's something to consider because it's like appropriate in 2023 when you talk about cultural anthropology. And then here, when you're done, let me get a drink of water real quick. When you're done, you typically, end like this. And again, everyone has their own style, your own approach. You could say, hey, we covered a lot of stuff in our conversation. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Did I miss anything? So sometimes by doing this, you're allowing the person to come in and fill space up with things that maybe you just didn't touch on. Like you think your topic is awesome. They may think it's so irrelevant, but until you ask them about something that you missed, they may talk your ear off or they may have nothing to say. So I think it's my style. I usually ask this. And also bullet point 2 here, I also say, hey, for the last 20 minutes, 30 minutes, I asked you a lot of questions. Do you have any questions for me? And so the biggest ones that are like unexpected, but you should be ready to handle. How is this project going to benefit me? That's usually a question because sometimes we have a really difficult time demonstrating the practicality and application of our work. So in one sense, the IRB, which is the ethical board at the university, they say there's no benefit to study participants. And so to be really clear, you can say there is no benefit to you, but there is benefit of like me having new knowledge, me sharing knowledge, and maybe having the public defined broadly, having a better understanding of stuff going on based on the themes that we talked about. And in the very bottom, I always leave things open-ended so that if you process your data, the interview material, you may have gaps and you want to follow up. So I always ask folks, hey, would you mind if I follow up if I have any questions and just confirm their email and telephone number. Lastly, for this video, this is the end of video 2. I got another video number 3, which goes into more details, again, to help you kind of move you forward with your project. So 3 things. The first thing is I subscribe to a online platform called Sonics. And what it does, it takes audio files and spits out a Word document. So, in other words, it transcribes the interviews. So, I'm happy if you send me your audio file. I think what I'll do, because this is gets unwieldy, I'm going to create a Google folder. I'll put it in the syllabus where it talks about the interviews, and you can upload your audio file. You just have to tell me it's there, and then I will send you the Word document. Usually the turnaround's pretty quick. If I see the email, I'll do it quickly because it's so fast. The only problem is Sonics. Number two problems. You need good source material. So your audio needs to be clear. Now, remember, part of the assignment is this has to be audio recorded. And if you don't know that, reread the instructions. So the audio source material, if it's not good, you're going to have a crappy transcript. And then number two is it's only about 90 to 95% accurate. So as you read it, you should listen to the audio and just update it as needed. There's a really good free program called Audacity to edit audio. I encourage you to check it out. You may have other programs you use. Awesome. Now, through the university, we have a free subscription for students called LinkedIn Learning. And there is a program, the Adobe Premiere program, and Audacity. There's tutorials, like hours and hours and hours of tutorials. So it's something available to you if you need the help. I'm also happy to help you if you can arrange a time to meet with me, or we can do it remotely. So that's it. I'm going to end here, take a little break, and then I have the last video, which goes into more of the survey findings and some additional resources. All right, man. I'm excited for you guys. And again, do not wait to the last minute, or you're going to have some problems. And I hate to see students have problems because I want all of you to get a stellar grade and really enjoy the process. All right. Take care. Bye.